I'm going to be gone for a week. Nina's going to preach next Sunday, and then I will be back in the saddle on Palm Sunday. So you get a little break from me, which is always nice. At least that's what my wife tells me. So, really excited. And we're baptizing Silas on Easter Sunday, so yay. I'm looking forward to that. Some other great people, too. So I had a guy that I've not really like close friends with, but a guy that I've known a long time. And him and I hadn't met for really quite a while, and not through any fault of anybody's. We just sort of, relationships sort of drift a little bit. And this was the case with me and my associate, and we hadn't met in 3 or 4, maybe longer, 4 years or so. And okay. I don't know. If you don't know about these lights have literally they were on the road with me in the 90s. I bought these from my twin brother who passed away a few years ago, but they're literally that old. These were in a club in Rock Springs, Wyoming at one point, if you know where Rock Springs, Wyoming is. Anyway, let me go back. So we'll start over because the podcast will all be now wonky, and they'll go, that church doesn't have any clue what it's doing. So anyway, this guy that I hadn't known for quite a while, but kind of found out through the grapevine and through some conversations I've had that he had a problem with me, and I didn't know it. Now, part of it was it was based on kind of the last meeting that we had, and it was like 3 or 4 years, and I had forgotten what it was. If you know much about our life, there's been lots happened in 4 or 5 years, and so I just had completely forgotten it. In fact, I kind of thought of it as I was like, it's been a while. I enjoyed the time, and then there's another guy's going like, no, he's really honked off about it, and I go, what? And I had to start kind of think about it and try to figure out what it was and figure out how I defended him. I couldn't really put it all together. And then through another friend, then the guy connected with me, and we went and we had dinner to kind of sort it out. I didn't want to have ill will. If I defended him, I wanted to know, and so I kind of found out what the nature of the offense was, and basically it's just probably the lowest place of my life, and I was trying to express some of the challenges, and I wasn't doing a very good job, and I came off as arrogant, and it wasn't my intention, and so it just, it made me feel bad, it hurt him, and the biggest thing was really miscommunication. And through the conversation several times, he mentioned confronting sin, and there wasn't really anything that I was doing that was sinful that needed to be confronted. But I remember asking him, I go, why do you think that I needed to be confronted when what I really needed was just friendship? I just needed someone just to kind of listen. And so it got me thinking on this kind of preaching coming into Easter. What are the characteristics of the church? When do we confront sin? Because sometimes I feel like there's a lot of we're just running around and confronting sin, and we're not always following what the Bible actually says about confronting sin. And we kind of jump to conclusions that often, in my opinion, tend to be kind of harmful out of our zealousness to confront sin. So when do we do it? Now, we all know that we're always going to show love, we're always going to show grace, but there is a time, isn't there, where we need to sort of stand up against things that are sinful, correct? I think we can all agree. We don't just let stuff happen, and we need to address stuff. But the way that we address it, I think, is really important. So I want to give you 5 little simple, in my little mind they are, things that I think might be helpful, and Mayor's kind of done a good job of kind of putting these things up for us. And here's the very first thing. We have to determine if it's really sin. So there's a lot of there's kind of a movement that's going on throughout Christendom where we're looking at things that maybe we've been taught and some things that we're kind of pushing back on, and we're kind of wondering, well, is that really, So we have to really look at it and see if it really is something that's simple. When I was a kid growing up in the church, I'm an old Gen Xer, and anybody like pushed like right around that age, probably there's a few of us. And growing up in the church, I can tell you that everything was a sin. You just literally couldn't do anything. So then you sort of circle back and you go, well, I actually, it turns out I could go with that girl that drank and chewed. I could have actually gone and seen her. What's that old thing? I don't drink, I don't chew, I don't run with girls that do, or something like that. No, I'm just made me look even older there. So anyhow, so we don't want to grow up in this place where like everything's a sin. So we have to like really determine, is it actually sin? And that goes beyond the scope of this entire message. But one of the passages that makes it pretty simple. Okay, this makes it. We teach our kids the second half of this part, but in Galatians 5, Paul's making the argument about what's sin, and it's actually pretty simple. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, and witchcraft. Any witchcraft? We got any witchcraft going on? Okay, no, we're good there. Hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissension, factions, envy, drunkenness, orgy, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. So his point of it is it's pretty obvious. Okay, we don't have to when we talk about sin, generally speaking, we know what it is. Okay, so we don't have to rethink every single aspect of our life, but some of these things seem to be pretty obvious to me, although in today's world, sometimes maybe some of it needs to be brought up. Now then he adds to it, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such there is no law. So that's the very first thing we say, well, is it actually sin? Is it something that somebody's doing that's sinful? And then in our mind, we might go, well, yeah, it is. Okay, so is that when I go confront? As soon as I've sort of determined that there's behavior, there's something that, well, maybe not quite, we might not be quite to that step first. Because the next step, after we've determined that something really is sinful, because remember, we have our favorite ones, right? But gossip makes all the big lists too. So, that's one that sneaks up a lot on us. Envy, that made Paul's list. There's lots of little lists, by the way, but envy, man, how many times you go, well, that guy's got a far nicer truck than I do. And then I made one of the lists. So we have to kind of look at it, what's on the list. Then what the Bible says is we're supposed to examine ourselves, right? So if I see somebody else out there who's talking about somebody else's truck and going, man, I sure like that guy's truck. I wish I had that. That guy's probably, man, making a lot of money, or he's probably doing something janky, or he's not something, And then, now he's gossiping too. So if I see that, then I'm looking and I'm going to examine my own heart. Here's what Matthew 7, 1-3 says. Don't judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged with the measure you use, and it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye, right? So we got this big old log sticking out of our face, and we're walking up, we're trying to say, hey, let me help you with that little speck you got there. It's pretty disingenuous, right? Now, this is a theme that goes all throughout the teachings of Jesus, so it's not just a one-off for him. Some of the more popular ones that we would see. Do you remember the story of the servant that had been forgiven? In the language, it's actually sort of comical. Jesus is using a number that's so astronomical. It's like saying, okay, so the servant was forgiven like $1 kajillion, and then he goes out, the king forgives him, he's supposed to go into debtor's prison, he's supposed to do all these things are supposed to happen, he says, forgive me, and then he walks out, and one of the other servants that owed him 35 cents, couldn't pay it, and he sends him into debtor's prison. He gets really rough with him. So these were themes. We have a rock up here. If you've been around, you know what that is. It's from the passage in John 8, where the woman, there were a woman and a man. A woman was caught in adultery. The man's not mentioned, which is indicative of part of the whole problem at the time. But they're ready to stone the poor woman, and Jesus said, "Whoever is without sin, throw the first stone." And to their credit, they all dropped their rocks, and they didn't judge her. So it's a reminder that we're supposed to drop our rocks. Before you chuck the rock, examine, you're probably going to drop it. And that's the whole point. If I see something that I see somebody doing, or I see behavior, some kind of pattern, and I look in my own heart. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm never going to confront a sinful issue. It doesn't mean I'm never going to do that, because if I look at my heart, there's always going to be sin there, right? But I do know that if I look in my heart, it's going to place whatever's happening in a perspective. And the closer that I walk with Jesus, the more righteousness and holiness, which means that I'm right with God, I'm going to feel, which is going to give me much more confidence and humility, frankly, to then talk to a person about behavior that might need to be changed. In fact, usually, it helps me gauge it. So if I look at something that I know to be wrong and I examine my own heart, it's going to help me gauge it and determine, well, is that something that needs to be addressed now? Is it, or do I have something in my own heart that I need to address? Is there things that need to come before? What's the importance of this? Is this something that, believe it or not every sin needs to be run down. Did y'all know that? We don't need to be the sin police. We're not called to do that. We don't need to run everything down. I know some people feel like it's their calling and nay, their duty, but it's just not. But there are some things that we need to address, and examining our heart first is really the fundamental step in doing that. Because here's what happens when you examine your heart. You come to a different place. You come to a different place, a more authentic place. Which then asks this next question. Who is this hurting? Okay? Now this is an important part of it. In the end, sin hurts people. It always does, which is why we're supposed to speak up against it and stand against it and confront it. That's why it's sin. It always harms somebody, and it's offensive to God because God is a holy God. Which then, and it often hurts the person who is sinning. So we're not doing anybody any help by not addressing sin, but it does help us gauge it. Now, please don't ever mishear me. We're not supposed to become comfortable with sin. That's not the idea here. The idea is more, we're going to kind of figure out what are the weighty issues. What does wisdom require of this? Because as the message of this message is, the title of it is, we're going to play the long game here. So I was asking myself this question: who is it hurting? And there are things that are done to you, like things that I did in the example that I gave, that hurt somebody. Now, whether or not I intended to do it or whether or not it was misconceived, it doesn't really matter. A person that I knew was hurt. And so it was my obligation to try to fix it, right? So I asked myself, is that hurting me? So that's the first question I always ask. Now, this is not only on how we deal with sin, but this is also how we deal with relationship, because a lot of what I'm sort of thinking through is, how do we as a congregation deal with relationship with one another when somebody is offended or when somebody has an issue in their life that needs to be addressed? How do we do that? So this is a lot about preserving and maintaining friendships and relationships. So I always ask myself, is this hurting me? Now, if the answer to that is, yeah, but I'm fine, I can move on. Now, if I'm not fine, and the offense was great enough that it's really occupying all my headspace, which I can determine that by how many imaginary conversations I have. Well, I'm going to just tell that person, If I'm not having a lot of those imaginary conversations, then I'm probably fine. Then the Bible says that we can forgive, which actually there's a better word than the translation forgive. The older translation says that we are to forbear. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit. Forbearance means I'm okay. I can move on. It's not quite forgiveness. It's not saying I forgive everything that you're doing. It's saying that this is one of those issues. It's probably not going to resolve itself, but I'm okay to move on from it. So it's a little bit of a different context. It's really one of the beautiful gifts that the Spirit of God gives us, which is why it's a fruit of the Spirit. It's the ability that we have to go beyond something. And so I asked myself, well, that was kind of offensive and maybe it was wrong, but I'm okay with it. I can move on. I don't need to have the meeting. Now, if it's something that is occupying my brain space and I'm not moving away from it and I need to address it. In fact, there's a few conversations, even just as I'm kind of thinking through this, that I go, you know what, I need to go follow up with that person. If the person is me, and it's something that somebody did that I'm seeing they did wrong by me, it says, if your brother or sister sins. Now, in the NIV, they changed that translation in their most recent translation, and I don't think they got it right. I think they dropped out, which almost every other translation, including all of the NIV's translations, if your brother or sister sins against you. So I went ahead and put the original one up there, but really this is if they sin against you, because that changes the whole context of what this verse does. If a brother or sister sins against you, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. So now the idea is pretty simple. If somebody has done something, whether it's, we know what sins of omission or sins of commission are. Some things we do on purpose, some things we do on accident. Like one of the things, for instance, if somebody is gossiping about me, for instance, and it's really harmed me, and I hear about it, and I have a relationship of such with the person that I go, I'm really offended that those things were said about me, and then we go have a conversation. If the person says, you know what, you're right, I shouldn't have said those things about you, and I'm sorry. Well, then it's all over. You've won a brother, right? Everything's fine. Conversation's over. Now, I wish it was that simple because I'm not going to say most, but much of the time when there has been a sin against me personally, then often when you go to the person and you say, hey, this really harmed me and my family, there's usually sort of that, but you X, Y, and Z. And so then the conversation becomes less profitable, doesn't it? And depending on what that is, then again, it's up to you whether or not you're going to then take the next step. Because this step is there's always a place where you can go, you know what? That's the gift of forbearance. I'm going to step back. We did not come to resolution, but I can forgive and I can move on. But again, if we can't, and again, this is all about measuring the degree of offense here, right? Because with each step of this process, it goes a little deeper. It takes a step further. The next thing it says, if they listen to you, you've won them over. So good, everybody's happy, we're all moving forward. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And this is part of Jesus' Jewishness. He was a Jew, and so he would still adhere to the Mosaic law. This comes out of Deuteronomy, and the idea was that you wanted to have a witness established, so you go with 2 witnesses. In our modern culture, it looks slightly different than that because this is not part of our codified law. But it is sort of carries with the idea of get a witness. So go with somebody, okay? So then, and in understanding this, which we'll see in a minute, this is not just like grabbing, I've seen this a lot, where somebody will have an offense with somebody and they really feel justified in pursuing it, so they're going to go get one of the elders of the church, or they're going to go get the pastor. Well, that's not the heartbeat behind this thing. This is another person that might be a friend or family, somebody that's close to the situation, somebody that has a personal investment into that relationship, into the piece of it. I don't think it's very helpful to kick this all the way upstairs to say, hey, we need to go confront so-and-so because of such and such. But that happens a lot in that happens a lot in church. And in my opinion, I don't think that's the heartbeat of what Jesus is saying. And I also don't think it's very helpful. Because if you're the person that the pastor or the elder and somebody came and said, hey, well, we just, X, Y, and Z, is that going to actually really restore somebody? And the answer is probably not. But if a couple of your friends come to you and say, hey, this was harmful, this hurt people, you're much more likely to get a result that you want, right? Because the result is always reconciliation. That's always the result. The result is always that we want to restore somebody. We want to restore a relationship. We want to mend a fence. So in my interpretation of this is find somebody else that would maybe know the person. Tom and I have known each other for a long, long time. So let's say, I had somebody that we also equally know. Let's say it's Sean Riney, who we've also known a long, long time. And Sean does something that really honks me off. And I go to Sean, I said, hey, this, you really hurt me when you did this. And Sean goes, oh, get over it, buddy. And I'm not satisfied with that. So then I take Tom and I say, hey, Tom, man, Sean really just blew me off and really, hurt me even more. And so then me and Sean and Tom say, hey, let's go grab a sandwich or a beer together and see if we can sort this out. And then we go and we all sort it out, and it helps to have somebody there. Okay, I think that's the spirit behind this. People that are vested in one another, people that have a relationship, that love one another, that's been proven through many years of relationship. Now, if they still don't listen, here's what Jesus says. But if they will not listen, take one or two other. Or if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Now, how we interpret this largely depends on how we interpret Jesus' understanding of the church. Because church as we know it wouldn't really even exist in Jesus' time. That wouldn't happen for another decade or two after the Holy Spirit came in Pentecost. So this is about 2 years before his death and his resurrection. Then he dies, the Spirit comes, the church is sort of established, but then it kind of gets spread all throughout. It's not really until Peter then begins to add some clarity to it, and Paul bring theology to it. So it would be another 20 to 30 years really before the earliest concepts of church would happen. And remember, the churches were these small organizations of people. So Jesus is talking now to the people of God, which still would have a very Jewish construct to it. But it's the free people. It's the called out people. People have been made free through grace. So I use the example of, rather than making it an institutional church disciplinary matter, it's better to think of ourselves as sort of a village of people that have relationship. Maybe it's kind of like a cul-de-sac or something. We know one another. We've got relationships with one another. And if Sean is still being obstinate, and Tom and I have come and we've met with him, well, then the next step is to probably say something into the broader circle. I don't think it's bringing somebody up in front. Sometimes that happens in some churches that have that kind of ecclesiology. We don't. It's probably better to come with maybe some other the leaders of the church, things that are happening, so that then there's this final opportunity to make things right. And if not, then it's kind of like, yeah, things didn't work out so well with Sean, so he's not here anymore, and we're sad about that, and that's we did the best we can. And then it says treat him like a pagan and a tax collector. Now, some of my favorite people are pagans, so I don't really have that big of a problem with it. It means I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to have all of the same, feelings for you, and we're still going to continue to pursue a life of the gospel. And maybe there'll be some reconciliation, there'll be some things, but I think this is a far more effective way of handling things that now, and remember, this whole conversation is predicated by who is it harming. And if this is predicated by something that's harming me personally. Now, the answer to this question, if you keep kind of going through it and say, well, how does this impact confronting sin or confronting a sinner when it's harming somebody else? And this is where I think it gets a little bit more important. And well, not important, it carries a different weight. Because at any time, somebody can hurt me, and I can make a decision whether I'm going to kind of follow this process or not. I have certainly the capacity and the God-given freedom to step away from something that has hurt me, and I can determine whether it's hurt me or not. But I have a different obligation when it comes to if it's harming somebody else. And if it's harming somebody else, which can mean a lot of things. Let's take for instance alcoholism. I've had several members in my family die because of alcoholism, and people that I knew and really struggle with it. If I see somebody having a beer in a bar, well, I'm going to probably go up and have one with them. But if I see somebody really destroying their life with alcohol and other, substance abuse, then I do have an obligation to say something in a way because it's harming them. It will destroy their life. Now, how I'm going to do that there's a lot of, as we're learning, it takes a lot of reflection. How am I going to approach this? Am I going to approach this as a condition or a sin, or I'm going to probably look at it a little bit more clinically, because I know so much more about it than I have in past years. I'm going to look at it much more clinically, but still, the person needs help, so they need to have somebody speak to them. If it's something like, and churches are notoriously terrible at this, if it's abuse within the church, and I don't mind saying this because we really need to guard our hearts about this. There's a whole movement that, in my opinion, is very dangerous, and it's taking the voice of women away in the church. Now, I grew up in that environment, so I know the ground really well. I know that framework really well. And what happens is when you remove, so it's always a male elder version. And everybody has different ideas of ecclesiology, so that's a whole nother topic. But it is my feeling, and the feeling of those of us, the leaders here at Emerge, that if you remove the voice of women, either in the family or in the church or in the community, there will be, it's a one-to-one. It's one-to-one. There will be abuse every single time. And then what happens is the person who is abused doesn't have a voice now. So they have to default to the abuser, who then are protected by other people who are keeping the framework together. And so there's not protection, and that's the absolute wrong way of doing it. And you also lose the voice of the children. When the voice of the mother is taken away, the voice of the children are taken away too. So we have an obligation as a congregation to absolutely, without equivocation, protect vulnerable people. Well, we just do it. We have to. So then when I see something happening, and I've had to do this before, if I see behavior that's harming a woman or a child or anybody really, then I have an obligation to do something pretty immediately with it. I have to make sure that that person is protected. I'm not turning the abused back to the abuser for reconciliation. You can't do that. There has to be, immediate action taken. But those are extreme cases. So there's a lot of other things that happen that you can take so I say that as a caveat. Because in Galatians 6, which speaks now more to the corporate response. The Matthew response was the individual response, but this is now more of a corporate response to how we treat sin in any congregation. It says, brothers and sisters, so now we know the context. Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently, but watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. And then note this. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And so what is the law of Christ? The law of Christ is what we just saw. To love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So in the end, that's the law of Christ. So if someone has themselves caught in something that is really harming other people, now that There's a lot of nuance in this. So here's an example I think that a lot of us would understand. Let's take this situation of adultery. Somebody's stepping out on their spouse, and you find out about it, or I find out about it. Something needs to be done because that's directly harming people, isn't it? It's directly harming a person. It's directly harming their children. It's directly harming their relationships, and something needs to be done with it. But it still needs to be done gently, and with the idea that we're going to carry a burden together. And it's going to be done by people who are led by the Spirit. So it's not coming in with a hammer, with humiliation, with arrogance. It's still something that needs to be done from a community concept. It still needs to be something done with the idea of restoring relationship, but with accountability. Particularly if there's been physical abuse within it, which I'm not suggesting that's the case. But if it's something like that, then we need to work on restoration from a much more gracious spot. And I don't always see that. I see a lot of things that are dealt with a hammer when a scalpel would be more appropriate. So as you can see, there's a bunch of steps here, isn't there? And you know what? When you don't follow them, you almost always get bad results. But when you follow them, you almost always get good results. Because what happens is people are either just sort of, they sort of like make their decision, and then sort of like they either leave, or there's restoration, or there's something that happens. The goal is always restoration. But once you've gone through that process of determining how big a deal is this, examining yourself, where is my own heart in this, of considering who it's harming. In other words, do I have any business in this? We don't have to run everything down. When we've gone through that process, and we determined the sense of urgency, now it's time to have a conversation with somebody. And here's how James puts it. James is the brother of Jesus. And again, here's my brothers and sisters. So this is the context of people within the church. If one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this: whoever turns a sinner from the error of his way will save them from death and cover a multitude of sins. Now think about that. If we do something that applies the grace of Jesus and brings people back onto a place of reconciliation, it covers sins because it brings people closer to Jesus. Right? There's this beautiful thing that happens when we pursue grace, when we pursue restoration, when we use wisdom, when we use patience. It doesn't mean we ignore sin. It means when we take a process to it. Because in the end, I always ask myself this question: what's my game? What's my end game here? And my end game is always the long game. We can blow a lot of people out of the water really fast if we just treat sin as the short game. Now, we don't always have the option. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions and say hard things, and we have to do it quickly. And I've been in that position when people are getting harmed. But generally speaking, we can kind of play a long game on this. Because here's what Peter said, talking about the same issue. Above all, all right? So when people say, well, what are you about? Are you about justice? You should ignore sin? You're just going to, no. Above all, love each other deeply. Because love covers a multitude of sins. Said it again. Usually when the Bible says something twice or more, it's probably something we need to listen to. We're playing a long game. If I become the sin patrol, do you know what I would get done? Almost nothing. you'd have no time to do anything but patrol sin. It's not my job, and I'm a pastor. It's not my job. It's not your job either. What our job is to love people like we love ourselves, to show grace, and above all, love each other deeply. Because I'm going to handle sin when it comes up in a very different way if I know that my number one mandate is to love you deeply. Some of y'all are pretty hard to love. But you have to love me deeply, and I know I'm hard to love. But that's sort of the contract we sign with one another. We say we're going to go through this together. We're going to bear one another's burdens. We're going to go through history and seasons, and there's going to be good ones and there's going to be hard ones, and we're going to love each other and we're going to care for each other. We're going to bear one another's burdens. And in doing that, we're going to cover a multitude of sins. We're not sweeping them under a rug. We're letting Jesus do what Jesus does better than we do, which is cover sin. Right? I think that's not only sort of a mission of every church, but it is a mission of our church. If you are asked, how does Emerge deal with sin? You say, well, we do it first with love. Always. That is always our default position. Doesn't mean we don't deal with it. It means we always deal with it from a place of love. Y'all dig? Let's be that kind of church. That's a pretty awesome church to be a part of. We're going to spend a little time in worship. And it's just because a lot of our families were traveling and gone. It's just Nina and me.